What's going on, guys? It's Paul here. Quick note, if you're noticing that my setup is changing in most all of my recent videos, it's because I'm currently working in what is essentially our storage room because I'm in the process of building my new studio slash office. And I mention that because if you're interested in following that type of build, I will have a link in the description to my personal YouTube channel, and I'll be posting videos starting pretty soon about that build on that channel. So check that out if you're interested. But I know the reason you're here today is because of the Zoom F3. I wasn't expecting to be talking about the F3 again until the end of the month, but thankfully they got the pre-orders sent out a couple of weeks early. So I have it here for us to take a look at, as well as the overpriced Bluetooth adapter. Here is everything that comes in the box. We have the Zoom F3, some paperwork, and two AA batteries. So very basic. It does not come with any cables or power adapters. Quickly just working my way around the outside of the recorder, we have, of course, the screen, as well as some buttons here that can control options for each of the two tracks. On, I guess this would be considered the top, we have the two XLR jacks. These are locking XLR. Over here we have the slide button for hold and record. This is the slot for the Bluetooth adapter, as well as the power button. On this side we have a 3.5mm line out jack, as well as a 3.5mm headphone jack, and volume control buttons for the headphones. On this side we have a play pause button, a stop button, and a menu button. Here is the USB-C port, and this is the card slot for a micro SD card. And then on the bottom of the recorder, we have the battery cover here for the two AA batteries. There are also these two rods, which can be used like a belt loop to attach this to a belt, or I think that Zoom is also going to be releasing a couple of other strap mounts that can be used with this recorder. And lastly, on the bottom we have this 1/4-20 mount, which I'm very thankful to see that they added in with this recorder, because as I mentioned in my previous video, the Zoom F1 did not have that, so I questioned whether or not they would have it on the Zoom F3. Thankfully they did, so that we can attach it to things like table tripods. Side note, if you're in the market for a good table tripod that is inexpensive, this brand I believe is called Cubo. And these things are like 20 bucks on Amazon, and I have purchased multiples of them now because they're cheap, they work well, and my favorite thing about them is that instead of having to spin the whole tripod around to attach it to something, there's a little wheel on the top. You just spin that and it's attached. Okay, since that last video clip that you just saw of me, it's actually been about 2 days now, and the reason for that is that if you saw the overview video that I posted about the Tascam X8, which is what this audio is being recorded on right now, I recorded my very first use with that recorder, published the overview video, and then in the days following that, as I was using the recorder, I started to notice some bugs, a couple of issues, nothing too critical, but all things that I will address in my final review of the X8. But I didn't want to run into the same issue with the Zoom F3. So before I went through any more with this recorder, I wanted to take a couple of days to test it out, and I am happy to say that I didn't notice any bugs or firmware issues. I did find two minor things that I didn't really like that I wish were different, and I will address those as we go more in depth. Okay, I have the F3 turned on now, and if you notice any flickering on the screen, that's just because of the shutter speed of my overhead camera. The device itself is perfectly fine, but you will notice that this is a pretty basic display. And originally I was a little disappointed to see that for an audio recorder being released in 2022, especially comparing that to something like the X8, which has this big full color display. However, in my testing with these, when you use them in bright sunlight, the X8 display can be pretty difficult to see, whereas this basic display on the Zoom recorder is much easier to see in the direct sunlight. Now I do have a microphone connected here so you can see the waveform readout of the display, but for right now what I want to do is go into the menu and show you what's available here. So the first thing on the top is Finder. So that's where you can navigate all of the audio files that are recorded to the current SD card. If I go back, Then you can see recording, and in that you can change things like the file name, the sample rate, which this recorder does go all the way up to 192 kilohertz. Next is file format, and with that, instead of recording both channels into separate mono files, if you want, you can change that to a single stereo file. There's also the option for pre-record, which will pre-record the 6 seconds before you actually start the recording. We can then go back to the main menu and drop down to output. That's where you can change the HP alert volume, the line out level, the line out limiter, or the line out delay. Next is USB audio interface. So you can turn that on for either connecting to a PC or Mac or to a tablet. I'm not going to go in depth and show you exactly how to connect this. It's really simple. It's just a USB cable connected to your device. I will say that I did some quick testing with this, and I connected it to my Windows PC, and the computer immediately recognized it as both an input and an output. I didn't have to download any special firmware or drivers to the computer. And I also tested it with my Samsung Galaxy tablet. And when I first connected it, I had the wrong USB-C cable. So I had to find one that was usable for data transfer. And as soon as I connected that, everything connected perfectly fine. Going back to the main menu, the next option we have is USB file transfer. We then have all of the system options. So we have things like language, date and time, LCD, which that just allows you to change backlight and contrast. We then have power options, SD card, Bluetooth functionality, which I'll talk about here in a minute, the timecode options, versions, and factory reset. Coming back out to the main screen, you can see that we have these buttons underneath the display. And if I click the little button under this gear icon, that's going to bring up some options for that one specific track. So I can turn it on or off. If I only have one channel plugged in, instead of still recording both channels, I can turn the other one off. There's also source, so you can select mic, mic with phantom power, line level, or line level with phantom power. Going back, you can also switch the phantom power voltage from 48 volt to 24 volt if you have a microphone that uses 24. There's also high pass filter. Now, one thing I found interesting about this is that it's not just off or on at some default setting. You can actually select the exact frequency or up to this certain frequency that you want the high pass filter to be engaged. And I think it goes all the way up to 240 hertz. Going back, you can also invert the phase, and you can select a delay for that particular track. So the audio that you're currently hearing is still through the Audio-Technica microphone in the X8, and I'll just show you really quickly. There's this button underneath the magnifying glass symbol. If I press that, then I can either decrease or increase the size of that waveform. And I'll switch now to the audio coming through the Zoom F3. So this is what you would be hearing through the headphone port, and I'm using the Rode Pod mic. And now if I bring that back up, and if I decrease the size of the waveform, or come back and increase the size of the waveform, as you might expect, it is also changing the gain of that audio. So what I'll do now is I can start a recording, and as you can see, I can still go in and change the magnification of that waveform, and as you can hear, it is still changing the volume of the audio coming out of the headphone port. However, one thing that it's not at all a bad thing, I don't think, just something that you'll want to be aware of, is that even though you can press record and then still change the magnification of that waveform on the fly, those changes are not actually being reflected in the recorded audio file. So when you press record, that recorded file will stay at whatever the gain was set at the time that you pressed record. And speaking of recording, one of the things I noticed that I would kind of like to see changed, if I tilt this over here so you can get a little bit better view of the record slider. All of the audio recorders I've used in the past that have a slider button for the record switch, you have to hold it down for a few seconds in order for it to start or stop a recording. That's not the case with the Zoom F3. So as you can see here, if I just even quickly hit that switch, it's going to start recording. And likewise, if I just barely bump it, it's going to stop the recording as well. And that could be pretty dangerous, especially if you are, say, wearing this on a belt, or if it's in some place where that button might get accidentally bumped, you could stop your recording and not notice it. So I would love to see in a future firmware update either that changed, or even better would be to give that to us as an option that can be enabled or disabled from the menu. The other thing I noticed that I didn't really like is that if you want to be able to place markers during your recording, and I don't mean sound markers, I mean the little marks that show up in your timeline in post-production, which is something I use all the time in my audio workflow. The only way you can do that is through the Bluetooth app, which also means you would be required to purchase the Bluetooth adapter. There is no way on the physical recorder itself to place markers. Speaking of the Bluetooth app, I will now put the little Bluetooth adapter in and give you a quick look at the app. So as soon as you put the Bluetooth adapter in, it will bring up the Bluetooth function menu, so you can either keep it off, select that you're going to use the F3 control, which is the phone app, or you can select time code. I'm going to go to F3 control. It says searching, and now I will open the F3 control app. If you've used the control app for the Zoom F2, this one's going to be very similar, and you do have almost all of the same control in the app that you do from the device itself. So as you can see, we still have the waveform style display. We can enable or disable any of the tracks. You can also select all of those same settings for each track itself. You can change the magnification of the waveform, and you can also change the line out volume as well as the headphone volume. There are all of these options for recording, stopping. This is where you can place a marker. Well, if you're actually recording, then you can place a marker. And if I go into the menu, there is Finder, so you can see the files on the SD card. And just like the control app for the Zoom F2 and the Tascam X8, you can view all of the files that are on the SD card, but if you select one to play it back, it only plays back on the device itself. It will not play back through the speakers of the phone, and there is no way to download the files through Bluetooth to your phone. Going back to the main menu, there's also recording, and I believe these are all of the same options in the app that we had under recording in the F3 itself. There's also date and time options and versions. And one other quick thing to note about the Bluetooth adapter itself is that, as you can see, it does protrude from the side just slightly, so you would want to be careful to not snag it on anything. However, the adapter does lock in a little more securely than what it did on the X8. I've actually had the Bluetooth adapter fall out of the X8. So with all of those functional aspects of the recorder covered, I want to do a couple of audio tests, and I'm going to move the AT4053B to this recorder because this is a condenser microphone, and I will test the 32-bit float recovery capability. So I'll use this microphone to test audio that is very much clipped and peaking, try to recover that in post, and then I'll also use the pod mic, which is a dynamic microphone, to try to recover audio that is very quiet. This is an audio test using the Audio-Technica AT4053B, which is a condenser microphone plugged into the Zoom F3 recording in 32-bit float. I have the gain set to maximum, the microphone is right next to my mouth, and I'm talking very loudly to intentionally peak the audio, and we'll see if this is recoverable in post. This is going to seem a little bit like ASMR, but I'm using a dynamic microphone recorded into the Zoom F3 in 32-bit float, and I'm whispering in the microphone. I have the gain set to minimum, and I'm curious to see if this is recoverable without introducing a whole lot of noise. That felt very awkward. And now back to normal levels. This is an audio sample of an Audio-Technica AT4053B condenser microphone recorded into the Zoom F3. This is what it sounds like, and here is some silence. And this is an audio sample using the Rode Pod mic, which is a dynamic microphone, recorded into the Zoom F3 without any type of cloud lifter. This is how it sounds, and here is some silence. The last audio test I want to do with the Zoom F3 is using the Rode VideoMic Go 2, because this is a shotgun condenser microphone, but it's an on-camera style microphone, which means that it only has a 3.5 millimeter output. And as you may have noticed, there unfortunately is no 3.5 millimeter input on the Zoom F3. But I have the Deity V-Link adapter cable here, and this is made to convert 48 volt phantom power into the, I believe it's 2 to 5 volt plug-in power that this type of microphone requires. So we'll test that now. This is an audio sample of the Rode VideoMic Go 2 being recorded into the Zoom F3 using the Deity V-Link adapter. I have 48 volt phantom power turned on in the recorder, and interestingly, I'm getting higher sensitivity out of this microphone than what I was getting with this microphone. Now, in my recent videos, I did have a few comments from people that were trying to decide between the Tascam X8 and the Zoom F3. And what I'll just say about the two from my initial time using them both is that I am still planning to keep the X8 because I occasionally do video shoots where I need more than just 2 inputs, and in those cases the X8 is what I'm going to use. The F3 definitely doesn't have all the bells and whistles that the X8 does, but my initial impressions so far are that this is a recorder that's going to just work. You can plug it in, press record, and you're good to go. And something I say often is never underestimate the value of simplicity. So I have a feeling that this recorder is going to be my go-to. If you want to see my initial overview video of the Tascam X8, you can click the little video below me. Or if you want to see my 32-bit float budget alternative to all of this, you can click the other little video below me. And thank you for watching.